My girlfriend went to a party, then texted at 3 a.m., "I'll stay at my ex's place, he'll take care of me," and call me insecure when I begged her to come home. So I packed my bags, exposed her lies, and walked away for good. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. The last few weeks before everything happened were especially tense. Not for one reason, but for an accumulation of small things that grew large. It all started after Rita attended a reunion with college friends. She told me about that reunion well in advance. She said it was an informal gathering that several classmates wanted to see each other after years of no contact, catch up, and remember old times. It didn't seem strange or problematic to me. I was never a jealous or controlling person. I always believed a healthy relationship is based on trust. The reunion was on a Friday night. I couldn't go with her because I had to work early the next day. She went alone. That night we didn't talk much. She sent me a couple of messages saying everything was fine and she was happy to see some friends she hadn't seen in years. The problem started the next day. Saturday morning, while we were having breakfast, Rita mentioned very casually that she'd run into her college ex-boyfriend at the reunion. I knew she'd had a long relationship before meeting me, but she didn't talk much about him. I knew his name, knew they'd broken up years ago, and nothing else. I asked her what that encounter was like. She told me they'd talked for a while, greeted each other cordially, and were on good terms. She used exactly that expression, on good terms. I didn't raise my voice or make an aggressive comment. I simply told her I didn't feel comfortable knowing she'd spent time talking to her ex, not because I doubted her, but because for me certain ties should be kept at a distance when one is in a stable relationship. Rita reacted in a way I didn't expect. She told me I was being toxic, that she couldn't believe I was bothered by something so normal, that just because someone was her partner in the past didn't mean they stopped being a person. According to her, I was overreacting to a completely harmless situation. I tried to explain it wasn't about control, but about boundaries. I told her from my point of view, it wasn't appropriate to maintain a close relationship with an ex, especially when there's still emotional history involved. I wasn't asking her to hate him or avoid him if they ran into each other by chance, just not to encourage that bond. She insisted I was wrong. She explained that her relationship with him hadn't ended due to infidelity, serious fights, or a lack of love. In her words, they'd broken up because their lives took different paths. He worked all day and also studied. They barely had time to see each other. Distance and exhaustion wore them down. Nothing more. "I don't love him anymore," she told me. "He's just a friend." That phrase kept echoing in my head. I didn't respond immediately. I thought my words. I told her I understood things don't always end badly, but that didn't mean it was healthy to maintain such a close friendship with someone who was an important partner. I asked her how she'd feel if I resumed frequent contact with an ex-girlfriend of mine. She replied she wouldn't care because she trusted me. That's when a dynamic began that repeated over the next few weeks. I expressed discomfort. She minimized it. I tried to set a boundary. She turned it into an attack on her freedom. Every conversation ended with the feeling that I was the problem. Arguments became frequent. They weren't shouting or insults, but long, tense conversations full of implicit reproaches. I began to feel I had to measure every word so as not to be accused of being insecure or controlling. A couple of weeks after that reunion, Rita told me another party was approaching. This time it wasn't a simple gathering at a cafe, but a bigger celebration organized by the same college group. There would be music, alcohol, and many people. When she told me, I felt a knot in my stomach. Not because it was a party, but because I knew who would be there. I asked her directly if her ex would also go. She didn't deny it. She said yes, that he'd probably be there like many others. Her tone was calm, as if there was no problem. I told her I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of her spending the whole night at a party with him, especially after the arguments we'd already had. It wasn't an accusation, it was a concern. She sighed, visibly annoyed. She told me she was tired of having to justify herself, that she wasn't going to stop living experiences just to soothe my insecurities. She used that word again, insecurities. I tried to stay calm. I told her I didn't want to forbid her anything, that I didn't have the right to, but that I needed to feel respected. I explained that for me, it wasn't a minor situation, that it generated anxiety and distrust. Not towards her as a person, but towards the context. The discussion was long. We went over the same points again and again. She defending her right to go, I defending my right to feel uncomfortable. At no point did I ask her not to go, but I did tell her clearly that I didn't want her to have contact with her ex beyond a polite greeting. There was an awkward silence. Finally, Rita looked at me and told me I was overreacting, but that she didn't want to keep arguing. She assured me she had no interest in talking to him, that she didn't see why she would. She said she was going to the party for her friends, not for him. Then she added something that at that moment reassured me. She promised me she wouldn't talk to her ex during the party. She said she respected how I felt and didn't want to create more conflict between us. The night of the party arrived faster than I expected. Rita got ready carefully, more than usual. I didn't mention it, but I noticed she wore a simple dress, discreet makeup, and her hair down. Before leaving, she gave me a quick kiss and told me not to worry, that she'd be fine and that she'd text me. I stayed home working on some pending office things. It wasn't urgent, but I preferred to get ahead on work to clear my mind. Having something to focus on helped me not think too much about the party. Just as she promised, Rita texted me as soon as she arrived. A short message, but enough to let me know she was okay. She told me several of the group were already there, that the atmosphere was calm and everything was normal. I replied briefly, wishing her a good time. Over the next few hours, she kept texting me approximately every hour. They weren't long conversations, they were simple messages. All good, we're still here, more people have arrived. Sometimes she'd send an emoji or a blurry photo of the place. Nothing out of the ordinary. The fact that she maintained constant contact reassured me. Not because I needed to monitor her, but because I felt she was considering how I felt. That made me think that, despite the arguments, our relationship still mattered to her. At 10 p.m., she was still texting me. By that time, her messages were shorter, less elaborate. I assumed the music was louder, or she was talking to several people at the same time. I didn't give it too much importance. I responded when I could, between documents and emails. At some point, I asked her if everything was still okay. She replied with a curt yes, accompanied by "I'll text you later." Around midnight, I noticed she hadn't texted me in a while. I checked my phone several times, but there were no new messages. I remembered we'd agreed she'd be home around 12:30. I thought she was probably on her way or had gotten a bit delayed saying goodbye. I didn't feel alarmed at that moment. I told myself there was no reason to worry, that it made no sense to imagine unnecessary scenarios. I turned off the computer and sat on the sofa waiting for a message to confirm she was arriving. Half an hour passed, then an hour. At 1 a.m., I still had no news. I tried to text her a short, neutral message, asking if everything was okay. There was no response. I thought maybe her phone had died or she was simply busy. At 2 a.m., I began to feel a restlessness difficult to ignore. It wasn't just the time, it was the silence. Rita had never disappeared like that without warning, especially knowing I was awake waiting for her. I called her. The call went straight to voicemail. I sat down again, trying to stay calm. I repeated to myself that not much time had passed, that maybe she was in a taxi, that maybe she'd gone to the bathroom and hadn't seen her phone. Still, something didn't feel right. At 3 a.m., I finally received a message. It said, "It's very late. The guys and I had too many drinks. It's too late to go home. I'll stay with my ex at his apartment. He'll take care of me." I read the message several times, as if I wasn't sure I'd understood it correctly. I felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Everything we'd talked about in the previous weeks flashed through my mind. I didn't take long to reply. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. "Tell me, where are you? I'll come get you. Don't stay with him." It wasn't an order, it was a direct, desperate plea, born of the anguish of the moment. I couldn't understand how it had come to this situation. The answer arrived a few minutes later. "Don't start that. He's my friend. He'll lend me his bed, and he'll sleep in the living room. Don't be insecure." I felt an emptiness in my stomach. I tried to reason. I wrote to her that it wasn't right, that it wasn't an acceptable situation for someone in a relationship. I told her that for me, staying overnight at her ex's house after a party and having had drinks crossed a very clear line. I told her that for me, it was a form of infidelity. The response was immediate and much harsher. "I hate your accusations. You're nobody to tell me what to do. He's a good man. You know my head hurts? Goodbye. I'll see you tomorrow." That was the last message. I kept staring at the screen for several minutes without moving. The silence in the apartment was absolute. I felt a ringing in my ears and a pressure in my chest difficult to describe. It wasn't just anger, it was the certainty that something had broken irreversibly. I didn't text her back, not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood that any message at that moment would be useless. She had already made a decision and didn't seem to care how it affected me. I lay in bed, but couldn't sleep. Every phrase from the exchange repeated in my head. "He's my friend. Don't be insecure. You're nobody to tell me what to do." It wasn't just the fact that she was staying at her ex's house. It was the way she dismissed my feelings, the way she turned my concern into an attack, and how she completely ignored the agreements we'd made. At that hour, with the room dark and the phone on the nightstand, I knew something had ended. I lay there awake, accepting a reality I hadn't wanted to see for weeks. Rita returned to the apartment around 2 p.m. I wasn't there. That morning I woke up early, long before my alarm went off. I'd barely slept, but oddly enough, I didn't feel exhausted. I felt empty, as if something inside me had already made a decision without needing words. I got up, showered, and dressed for work. Before leaving, I looked at the apartment. There was no trace of her. The bed was still untouched on the side I normally used. I didn't leave any note. I didn't feel the need to. On the way to work, I thought about many things, but not about reproaches or pending arguments. I thought about logistics, about timing, about what to do from that moment on. When I arrived at the office, I asked to speak with my boss. It wasn't an impulsive conversation. I'd already been feeling stuck for weeks, and what happened that night only accelerated something that deep down was already in process. I told him I needed a branch transfer. My boss was surprised. He asked if something had happened. I explained briefly and professionally that I needed a change of environment, that I was willing to take on new responsibilities, and that I knew a new branch was opening in a nearby city. He checked his computer and nodded slowly. He told me there was indeed a vacancy, but the process usually took time. I replied that I was willing to go whenever necessary, even with short notice. Then he asked me a direct question. "When could you leave?" I looked at him without hesitation. "Tomorrow." He raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. He told me it wasn't usual, that people normally needed weeks to organize. I explained I was already ready. I didn't go into personal details. After a few seconds of silence, he mentioned he had a friend within the company who had recently been transferred to that same city and could facilitate the process. He asked for a few minutes to make some calls. When he returned, he confirmed the change was possible, that I had to sign some documents that same day and report to the new branch the next day. I thanked him and went back to my desk. For the rest of the day, I did my work like any other day. I didn't talk too much, didn't ask for opinions, didn't share my reasons with anyone. I returned to the apartment around 5 p.m. I knew she'd already be there. As I entered, I found her in the kitchen preparing something to eat. She looked tired. Her hair was carelessly pulled back, and she wore comfortable clothes, as if she'd spent the entire day without going out. She turned when she heard the door. For a moment, she seemed relieved to see me. She took a step towards me and began speaking immediately, as if she'd been rehearsing for hours. She said we needed to talk, that she wanted to explain what had happened, that nothing had occurred, that everything had gotten out of control, and that she didn't think I'd react like this. I didn't respond. I put the keys on the table without looking at her and walked straight to the bedroom. I heard her continuing to talk behind me, justifying herself, repeating that I was overreacting, that she loved me and would never hurt me. I opened the closet and took out the first suitcase. It was at that moment that she stopped talking. She asked me what I was doing in a tone that mixed confusion and fear. I didn't answer her. I took out another suitcase and placed it on the bed. She entered the room, walking slowly, as if she didn't want to believe what she was seeing. She asked me if I was joking, if I was overreacting, if we couldn't sit down and talk like adults. I didn't answer her. I started folding my clothes carefully, putting them in the suitcases. I didn't do it in a hurry, but not with doubt either. Every movement was precise, almost mechanical. Suddenly, she knelt in front of me, grabbed my arm tightly, and began to cry. They weren't silent tears. They were deep, desperate sobs. She apologized again and again. She said it had been a mistake, that she hadn't thought about the consequences, that she couldn't lose me. She told me between sobs that nothing had happened with him, that they only slept, that he was in the living room, that there was nothing physical. I didn't react. I kept folding clothes, zipping zippers, checking drawers. My silence seemed to despair her more than any shout. She asked me if I wasn't going to say anything, if I wasn't going to listen to her, if I wasn't going to defend our relationship. I didn't respond. She suddenly stood up and walked towards the apartment door. She stood in front of it, blocking my way. When I tried to move forward with one of the suitcases, she wrapped her arms around me, hugging me tightly, as if she could stop me that way. She told me I couldn't leave, that we needed to resolve it, that she was confused, that I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Then she asked me a question in a broken voice. What about the rent? Who's going to pay the rent? It was the first time I'd spoken since I'd arrived. I looked at her directly, without raising my voice, without visible anger. Your ex takes care of you. Let him pay it, I said. Her arms loosened. Her expression suddenly changed. It wasn't just sadness, it was disbelief. As if she hadn't expected me to say something like that without trembling. I gently moved her hands away, opened the door, and took the suitcases. She remained motionless, standing in the middle of the apartment, crying in silence. She didn't follow me, didn't scream, didn't say anything else. I went out and closed the door behind me. As I went down the stairs, I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, nor guilt. I felt I was closing a chapter that had nothing left to offer me. I arrived in the other city that same night. The transfer was quick and unceremonious. I didn't feel nostalgia on the way, only a kind of emotional disconnection, as if my mind had decided to go into autopilot mode to avoid thinking too much about what I had just left behind. I didn't have my own place yet. The company had told me it might take a few days to get settled permanently. Luckily, one of my coworkers, who had been transferred to that same branch a month earlier, offered to let me stay at his apartment while I got settled. I accepted without thinking too much. It was a small apartment, but tidy. He lent me the sofa and a blanket. We didn't talk much that night. He asked if everything was okay. I told him yes, that I just needed to sleep. He didn't insist. That night, I slept better than I expected. The next morning, when I woke up, I had several messages on my phone. They weren't from Rita, they were from mutual friends. At first, I didn't open them. I got ready for work, showered, and had breakfast calmly. I knew deep down those messages wouldn't bring anything good. Still, I couldn't ignore them forever. When I finally read them, I confirmed what I imagined. Some asked me what had happened, others were more direct. They accused me of having abandoned the home. They said I had left without explanation, that I had left Rita alone, that I had overreacted. Someone even wrote that what I did was a form of emotional violence. There was a group chat where we all were my friends, her friends, and mutual friends. That group had become a space of collective judgment. I hadn't written anything there since the night before. Rita, yes. I didn't read all her messages in detail, but the tone was clear. She presented herself as someone confused, regretful, abandoned. She said I had left without listening to her, that I had made a drastic decision, that I had left her with responsibilities she couldn't handle alone. In no message did she mention staying overnight at her ex's house. In none did she repeat the phrases she had said to me that morning. The story was incomplete, carefully edited. I didn't feel anger, I felt tired. For a few minutes I thought about doing nothing, about leaving the group and moving on with my life. But I understood that if I didn't say anything, that version would be the only one left. I didn't write a long text. I didn't argue. I didn't attack. I took screenshots only of the conversation between her and me, exactly as it happened from the message where she told me she would stay at her ex's house until the last one, where she called me insecure and told me I was nobody to tell her what to do. I didn't add comments. I didn't explain context. I didn't add interpretations. I sent the screenshots to the group, then left the chat. I didn't block anyone. I didn't silence notifications immediately. I just simply closed that door. During the next few hours I was working, I had things to learn in the new branch, new people to meet, different processes. I focused on that. In the afternoon, as I was returning to my colleague's apartment, I saw I had a message from Rita. It said I had ruined her life, that everyone hated her now, that nobody defended her, that they had judged her without understanding her, that I had been cruel. I read the message only once. I didn't respond. I hadn't invented anything. I hadn't exaggerated. I had just shown exactly what happened. That night, I sat on the sofa with the phone in my hand, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about the arguments, about the promises, about the words that were said lightly and then couldn't be taken back. I thought about how for weeks they made me believe my boundaries were insecurities, that my discomforts were flaws, that my silence was immaturity. And I understood something. I didn't lose a relationship that night. I lost an illusion that was no longer sustainable. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling of starting something new, not something exciting, not something ideal, but something honest. A life where I wouldn't have to justify feeling bad when something crossed my boundaries. I didn't text her back. I didn't explain my side to anyone else.